Well, this evening session, as we culminate this extraordinary inaugural event, again, grateful that all of you are here, live and virtually. It's been wonderful to celebrate together. Dr. Wendy Patrick, she has been on television. She's a trial lawyer that has successfully tried 165 cases in San Diego, apparently was rated one of the top 10 trial lawyers in San Diego. I'm not sure how they rate all of that, but is renowned in that regard, is a very gifted communicator and someone that is very intent on the dimensions of women and children being protected from exploitation. And so she comes to us through a recorded session, and we're going to be greatly encouraged by Dr. Wendy Patrick.
Hello, my name is Wendy Patrick, and it is a pleasure to join your conference. I am active in church ministry, but also a career sex crimes prosecutor. The Lord called me back to school mid-career to earn a Master in Divinity degree and also then a PhD in theology. After that, I sought formal ordination. But my thesis was about my topic for today. It was about how are sexual predators able to infiltrate our schools, our churches, and our communities. The title of it was Lessons from the Dark Side. Now, that's a title to use if you want people to come to your dissertation defense. But it's also a title that captures exactly why this is such a problem for us as church leaders today. It involves the psychology of attraction, examining how it is that we have predators walking in our midst that we don't see until sometimes, sadly, it's too late. It's also about how well-educated, worldly victims and parents and witnesses miss the red flags that perhaps if we were paying better attention, we would see. But it's more than that. What I've done in the last 25 years that I've been a practicing attorney is examine this issue of how do we spot sexual predators and how do we spot victims from both sides of the equation. And I'd like to share with you some of what I've learned in that 25 years that will make us better at protecting ourselves, our children, and our church communities. So thank you, first of all, for your care and interest in protecting your congregation as we work together. And we want to make our congregations both welcoming and safe. How do we do that? Well, we see the headlines and we also meet the survivors. And we acknowledge that despite the precautions we take, there will be problems. But here is the question. Do you know what a sexual predator looks like? How about a victim? Could it be that they are mingling within your congregation on Sundays, hiding in plain sight? Well, I'm here to tell you that the answer is yes, but that doesn't mean that you cannot learn how to see them more clearly if you know what to look for and where to look. So Matthew 18 tells us, "See that you do not despise one of these little ones. For I tell you that in heaven their angels always see the face of my Father who is in heaven." But in Matthew 22, we're also taught to love our neighbor as ourselves. How do we strike that balance? How do we both love others and protect our children from dangerous people? How do we learn to give people the benefit of the doubt, but also observe them objectively? My latest book, aptly entitled Red Flags, is about how to do that, separating the dangerous from the desirable. How can we do that? And how can we do it sooner rather than later before another victim is claimed? Perceiving others through reading glasses, not through rose-colored glasses, is key, no matter how charming they are. Now, here's a question. Do you think you're good at doing that within your church congregation? Now, when I ask this question to my jury panels, they always raise their hands and they say, absolutely, I am excellent at gauging credibility and seeing red flags. Now, when I ask them why they think they're so good at this, you can imagine what they say. It's because they have children, of course. They know when little Susie and little Johnny are lying, and they know which one of them is telling the truth. But that's because they know their children. How well do you know your church congregation? Now, some of them you know really well, and I think that's great. But there's nothing about being able to be friendly and even being able to elicit let's say, information from people in your congregation at fundraisers and at church picnics and at baptism celebrations. There's nothing about that that necessarily makes us expert lie detectors. We have to know more because it's human nature to give people the benefit of the doubt. But it is also, unfortunately, human nature to be fooled, precisely because we want to give people the benefit of the doubt. So, there was a famous quote from New Scotland Yard about child predators. And you had an investigator saying, "I never met a pedophile I didn't like." Think about that. What does that mean? It means that dangerous people are likable. They're nice. They're friendly. That's why we miss those red flags. That's why we wear rose-colored glasses instead of reading glasses. When talking about dangerous people who prey on children, it is about science and statistics, a mix of the empirical and the anecdotal. That's what I've done throughout the course of my career, and that is the points that I'm going to give you tonight. First of all, why your church? Well, for people of faith, church is sanctuary, hallowed ground. For sexual predators, it is a hunting ground. Why? Several reasons. First, church is kind of like the DMV in the sense that it's the great equalizer. You can find people attending Sunday services from all walks of life, all demographic backgrounds. Some you know, some you don't. But you have a mix of people that are able to mingle freely without drawing suspicion. Now, my point is maybe they should draw suspicion if we know what to look for. But we also have to consider the fact that we do have to be welcoming. That is how we attract new members, we grow our congregation, and we model Jesus Christ to other people. But we must be both accepting and attentive to signs that there may be a wolf in our midst. How do you spot dangerous people in your congregation? Let's take an ABC approach: appearance, behavior, and communication style. We'll start with appearance. Now, in terms of appearance, we cannot default to the confidence of Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart in 1964, describing his ability to recognize obscenity. Remember what he said: "I know it when I see it." When it comes to spotting predators visually, you don't. You can't. When I am asked what a predator looks like, if I'm speaking to a live audience, I usually say, "Look around the room." In other words, the point is they look just like the rest of us. It is that cultivated appearance that gives them away sometimes. But in terms of attire, there are things we can look at. Now, obviously, we look at focus too. When somebody is completely focused on children and not adults, that's a huge red flag. But appearance also means attire. Child predators often reveal their true colors by trying to look like their victims. In order to identify with victims, they, in the words of Paul, become all things to all victims in order to exploit some. That's a perversion of Scripture. That's 1 Corinthians 9:22, turned on its head. That's what child predators do. They try to appeal and fit in by dressing the part. Now, they wear trendy clothes, but maybe that's not the way they dress when they're on the job. They sport the latest Disney theme or adolescent fad when they're around the children in your congregation, but it is specifically designed to appeal to the particular underage group they prey upon. Now, lest you think, gosh, that sounds like our new youth group leader, there's more than that. Don't worry. There's much more than that. You have to go deeper. Now, as we learned in 1 Samuel, appearances can be deceiving. We can't just look at the outward appearance. We have to look farther than that, which leads me to the B, which is behavior. Now, we learn in Luke chapter 6 that you can judge a tree through its fruit. Sure enough, predators reveal themselves through their actions, which speak louder than words. How do they behave? The answer is badly if you are around them long enough to notice. Patterns make the predator, and that is one of the reasons we have to be more attentive. Now, one thing about a predator's behavior, by definition, they are boundary violators. They stalk victims on their turf, often charming their way into the homes, cars, and personal space of unsuspecting victims and their families. They spend too much time in the homes of their neighbors in violation of Proverbs 25:17. They get too close physically. They often have a pattern of making people uncomfortable or of forming inappropriate relationships. Another red flag is they don't follow rules or respect regulations. They often behave differently towards children. They act like children. This is something I've learned in the course of my career that many people don't automatically know to take notice of. They often act like children in that they join their underage companions in rule breaking and reckless living. Now, I don't just mean ice cream for breakfast. This could also mean things like playing baseball in the house, trying alcohol, viewing pornography, doing things parents would never let their children do. Because unlike responsible adults, predators not only are engaging in grooming behavior, seeking to desensitize our precious young ones to what they should and shouldn't be doing at that age, but they actually, some of the predators, view children as peers. Now, in my book, I call this pathological identification, and it is something to look for that distinguishes predators from somebody that just maybe dresses young. So you need more than appearance. This is the behavior. But there's even more than that. Because I know some of you might be thinking, wait a minute, I know adults that act like children sometimes. Is that really a red flag? Well, in combination, yes, but there has to be more. You're right. Predators give themselves away not just by their affinity for kids or by their occasional bad behavior, but by their inability to sustain relationships with adults. Many child predators live alone. Many have never known age-appropriate romance. This is significant. And although predators might actually have partners or maybe even spouses, many child predators I've had on the stand at trial have admitted those relationships were for show. And this is apparent in outward appearance if we're paying attention. Because as we watch couples interact, we can tell the dynamics between them. Have you ever been out in public and noticed, looks like those two are in a fight? Or it looks like those two are having a disagreement? Well, with predators, sometimes you won't necessarily notice that because they don't care enough about the relationship to be worked up over a disagreement. But you may notice the awkwardness between the couple. Some couples, even some partners, some spouses, just don't seem to click. And that is one of the things I've noticed as a red flag over the years. So if we don't spend too much time on our phone and look up and actually pay attention to our congregants, this is another thing behavioral-wise that we may notice. The C stands for communication. Predators communicate with children differently. They speak like children much of the time, both in terms of tone, topics, and voice intonation. Now, unfortunately, that makes them all the more authentic to kids, and that makes them all the more appealing to our precious little ones. But they also talk to children differently regarding the subjects they bring up. They ask inappropriate questions about private parts or personal information. You may be tipped off when children use words that you certainly have never taught them. And when you ask them where they heard it, they're often very honest about who used that type of terminology with them. And speaking of how our children behave, this is also something we look at in terms of spotting victims. Same ABCs in a sense. Appearance, behavior, and communication style. Now, in terms of appearance, young ones are dressed in the clothes that you bought them. But older children and young teenagers, sometimes you might see them and notice they're wearing provocative clothing that you certainly know their parents didn't buy them. And remember, you're seeing them at their Sunday best. Where did they get the rest of the clothes and jewelry? Oftentimes it has to do with who they're spending their time with. Now, I've spent years prosecuting human traffickers. This is a huge human trafficking red flag. That's where they got those clothes. That's where they got that jewelry. And sadly, that's also where they picked up some of that terminology that they're using. Because the perpetrator, the pimp or trafficker, has a very different interest in cultivating those young people. Now, in terms of seeing signs of injury, unlike the bruising or pattern burns we might expect to see with child abuse victims, children who are being sexually abused might look normal but behave and communicate differently. There's those ABCs again. Age appropriate sexualized behavior becomes inappropriate behavior and vocabulary. Those things don't develop naturally. Your children pick them up from someone. We want to determine who. So if you notice these things and you know the child's parents, you might have that discussion. We know children are exposed to inappropriate material at school, but many kids talk about these things with their parents, who lovingly discourage wrong behavior. Predators encourage bad behavior, so we want to know who a child is spending their time with. When I was growing up, my parents would say, "Show me your friends and I'll show you your future." Well, there's an element of truth into the way our children spend their time and with who. Same thing with behavior. Underage victims might be troublemakers, which is why they may have been selected by a predator to begin with. The thinking goes that maybe a child is less likely to be believed if they reveal the sexual abuse if a predator victimizes and exploits a child that is already compromised when it comes to engaging in bad behavior. They need more pro-social role models. So when you look at the marginalized communities and the marginalized young people that's sometimes being victimized, it is about intentional victim selection on the part of these predators. Our goal is to spot these strategies of seduction before it's too late. We want to be able to spot the relational dynamics of offender-victim relationships. We want to spot grooming behavior in order, as the TV show says, to catch a predator before it is too late. So the takeaway, what do we need to do as a church congregation and as leaders? We seek to balance inclusivity and attention, caring for and protecting our flock, spotting predators in our midst before another victim is claimed. And together, we can keep our churches safe sanctuaries for everyone. God bless you and thank you for all that you do to make our world better for each other and for our children. Thank you so much for having me and enjoy the rest of your conference.